G'day guys, and welcome to my lab and of course to our series 0 to Zelda, how to make an ARPG in Godot 4. So what we are up to in this lesson is we will be creating our enemy, and I am pretty excited because when it comes to video games, we've talked a bit about some of those game design theories like gating and nonlinear progression. We've also talked about how important player characters can be to individuals. Well, enemies are also a massive part of that puzzle. Having enemies that seem really appropriate to the world that you're building, where the combat and the difficulty in things scale over time, so you get that increasing difficulty. All these things go into making a game great, and we're going to explore some of those key ideas today. Here is our rather lengthy list of what we've managed to do so far in the 5 lessons we've had. So we've set up our project, our basic tile map, we created our player, we gave them a script and some animations, we set up our follow camera, collision shapes for the player and for some of our trees and rocks and things. And then we added layers, new layers to our tile map for those trees and rocks. And hopefully in your might time that you have had, you have been working on expanding your map, creating barriers so your player can't just walk freely everywhere and things like that. Hopefully. I've done a little bit of work on mine. It's probably nowhere near as good as yours, as you'll see when we start getting into it, but hopefully that's what you have been doing with your spare time during this project. Well, we've done heaps so far and we've still got a lot more to do, and today our game starts looking a lot more like an action role-playing game because we've got our enemy coming to join us. Now, when I think of enemies, I think of, Bowser, or the Mario softer ones like Goombas or Koopas. But, I had friends who had Segas, so, there's Dr. Robotnik there as well. He was a big baddie. And we can't forget, obviously, given we are talking about The Legend of Zelda, there is Ganon, who is still an enemy that is recurring in new franchises to this day. They're the sort of guys that I think about, but I also got exposed to some more interesting enemies when I was a kid as well. So there was, for example, these guys. You might remember them from Duck Hunt if you're as old as me. That just came with the light zapper on the NES. I used to think I was a pretty good shot, but it turns out as long as it's basically pointing at the screen and it sees the screen flash down the muzzle, you score. So you could just hold it, yeah. Anyway, I was little and I didn't realise it at the time. It's incredible how much I missed, given all I had to do was point it. Anyway, another very memorable enemy from my childhood is Mechanized Hitler from Wolfenstein. Now, that does, I think, put my age pretty clearly for some of you. You would know pretty much right how old I am now if that's sort of my childhood. But these guys still colour my thoughts about what an enemy is like. We can have silly takes on things like, Mechanized Hitler, or Dr. Robotnik is actually a kind of a silly caricature, right? And what I think we should think about when we're considering enemies today is what goes together, right? So Dr. Robotnik, he kind of makes sense in a Sonic the Hedgehog world, because Sonic, of course, is a bit of a teenage hooligan, I suppose. Dr. Robotnik is this clownish, buffoonish, evil man. It all feels sort of like it fits together. And the world of Mario, though he is a plumber, which I'm still not entirely across, the rest of that world looks right. Like all the things seem to make sense in a nonsensical way. And then, of course, Zelda, we've got things that look creepy and scary because we're in this scary place. Link's been dumped there. There's no instructions. We're not meant to know what's going on. We've got to observe our surroundings. Oh, geez, this one bounces around weirdly and stuff like that. So we got to think about our enemies in terms of, well, what is the world we're creating? I don't just want to do whatever first comes to mind. I want to make sure that the caricature of whatever it is fits the story. Now, as you probably remember, our sprite, or at least the one I've been using, has been a funny little bogan guy that I made for a bit of a laugh. And I can do that because I'm kind of part bogan, right? I was brought up in Belmont, a bit of a Belmont bogan, but I'll do my best to leave as much bogan out of the accent as I can so I'm really clear. That being said, what is going to be the ideal enemy for a bogan. So I was thinking about it. I thought, oh, it could be crocodiles, right? There's lots of crocodiles here in Australia. Bloody big things. There's great white sharks that we've got to worry about when we go to the beach. We've got to keep our eyes out for snakes like eastern browns and dugites and tiger snakes and things like that. Also, redback spiders. I don't know if you've ever heard the song Redback on the Toilet Seat.
There was a redback on the toilet seat when I was there last night.
Classic. What else could we be worried about here in Australia? Oh, there's all sorts of jellyfish and things like that. So there's lots of things that I think are pretty high up there on the list of enemies for a bogan. But we're coming into spring here in Australia, and when we're coming into spring in Australia, that means only one thing. I am not afraid to admit that I am petrified of these terrors. They are incredibly lovely for like 9 months of the year, and they have the most beautiful song. But unfortunately, when they are nesting, they are incredibly territorial. So I reckon for my game with our bloke, maybe Bazza the Bogan, he's going to have some magpies as his first enemy. I reckon that's appropriate. So let's have a look at exactly what we're doing today with our WWSS, and then we'll get over into Godot. So what are we learning today? Well, we're learning how to create an enemy in our ARPG. That's going to include our character body, our animated sprite 2D, and a script, as well as a collision shape. So there's lots of things that we're going to be doing today, but you've already sort of done all of them. So it's really applying things we've already started learning. Why do we need enemies in our games? Well, we want our game to be engaging. We're not just doing this to tick a box. We want to try and make a genuinely fun and challenging game by the end of this. So we want enemies in there to give us a bit more of a challenge. Our skills today is to apply the things that we've already learned. But hopefully, if you are still having a bit of trouble, jump back, watch one of the other videos too, and then you'll be able to come back and apply it. Well, by the end of this lesson, success will be you having a player and an enemy that can interact with each other and the world. And I reckon that's a pretty awesome amount of progress in the few short lessons we've had. Just before we jump into Godot, if you want the magpie asset that I'm going to be using in today's lesson, you're more than welcome to download it for free from my itch.io, so AJ's Learning Lab, and I've renamed the project to be Bogan World because it seems fitting for the one that I'm building, but whatever you're doing, I'm assuming it's different to that. I hope that you're finding assets that really suit your style, or you've got the talent to actually make them yourselves, and I'm sure many of you do have some pretty good pixel art skills. I, on the other hand, not so much, but I do believe that anyone can learn anything, so maybe one day I'll attempt to learn how to pixel art better. Alright, so that's where you can find the asset. Make sure you just drag that magpie PNG into the Godot file explorer like we have done with the other things. Now we're ready to jump in there and create our enemy. So if you remember how we create a new scene, we go up the top, click on the plus sign, and then that gives us our new empty scene. We then want to create a node for it. So other node, can you remember what it was last time? Character body 2D. So we search for character body 2D, enter. There it is there. I'm going to remember now this time, I forgot last time to rename it. This one's going to be called Magpie by me. If you're not doing a magpie, feel free to call yours enemy. And just make sure that wherever we go with our script and stuff, you're making sure that you're paying attention to what I'm calling things and what you might want to call things. If you don't want anything to go wrong, I recommend just using the sprites that I've given you and use the exact same stuff. But I thoroughly encourage you to try and do it your own way. You're going to learn the best when you're trying to apply it in your own fashion. So if you don't want to use my sprites, I completely understand, they're horrible. You probably just want to pay extra attention to naming things and that sort of stuff. All right, so magpie. Our magpie needs a animated sprite 2D, just like our player did. So we're going to do our search. We're going to search for animated sprite 2D, Dunskies. All right, so we've got our magpie. We've got a child node of the magpie's character body, which is called an animated sprite 2D. And our animated sprite 2D should have a whole bunch of stuff we can look at in our inspector window. So over we go, we click on animation. Is this coming back? Sprite frames, we click on empty, we click new sprite frames, and then we click on it again. that brings up our animations menu thing down the bottom. So hopefully you've dragged your magpie.png or whichever you're using into your file explorer by now, because we're going to use that to create our animations. So the first animation I want to do is going to be called fly right. I'm making a magpie, it's going to be flying, okay? So fly right, I'm going to click this A button here now so I don't forget about it, just so that's the animation that loads first time. And then we come across and click on our grid, and then we get our magpie, and then we have to set the correct horizontal and vertical columns and rows, and our magpie was 4 across and 5 down. And now you can see there's all our pixels aligned nicely. So I said I was going to do fly right, so I need to get my right flying animations, and you always click on them in order that you're going to use them as an animation, because generally they're going to be, you know, sequential. You need those to be in order 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to add those frames, and then I'm going to zoom in and see what sort of amazing masterpiece I've created. I actually haven't even tested this, so it's probably going to be horrible. And play. I guess it's a bird. Yeah, well, it's fine for what I'm trying to do, but I've got a very strong suspicion you're going to use your own sprites. All right, so let's end that. I also want to create a fly up animation as well. So let's create that one too. Fly up. And then you can probably guess what we need to do next. And then I'm going to grab those ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Add. In our code, we're going to flip those to be flip vertical and flip horizontal to sort out the direction that the bird is flying. That way we don't have to do any more animations here. When we sort out our combat later, we'll come back into both our player and our magpie to add in the combat animations, but for now this is fine as it is. Alright, so we've got that happening. He can now fly, but there's an awful lot that's still wrong with this guy. So I think, hey, that was a rhyme. I think what I want to do now is add our collision shape just whilst we're here. So we're going to add a collision shape 2D to our magpie, and that's come up there now. And remember, with our collision shape, nothing automatically appears. We have to go and select the shape we want. So we come across to our inspector, find shape, and then empty. Remember I said I like using the capsule, and I think our bird here is going to be another good candidate for a capsule. You see how it sort of gets the generic shape, but we can ignore a little bit of those wider wings, and I think I'll make it a little bit shorter there. Something like that is our collision shape, so that the wings don't catch on things. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's save it. So we want to save it as magpie.scene. Excellent. Now we have done our animations, or we've created our scene, we've added our sprite and our animations and our collision shape. The next thing is to get into our script. All right, so do you remember how to create a script? So we want to go up and click on our root node, so the magpie one that we renamed to magpie. We're going to click on that, and then we're going to click on the scroll with the green plus, and that's going to attach a script to the magpie node. And we can click off, see often that's highlighted clicked on the template one. We don't need that, just turn that off, because we're going to copy in all our own code in just a moment. Well, I'm going to copy mine in, you're going to read it and type it in. It's the best way to learn, I promise you. So I want it to be called magpie.gd as well, so I'll click on create, and that gives it to us here in our script. So what I'm going to do now is paste in all my code. Let me make a bit more room here, just so you can see it, and we'll go through it line by line. Okay, so back to the top. Starts just like our player did, extends character body 2D. So that's just saying we're grabbing those characteristics for the rest of our files. So we're going to get that variable speed to start with. I'm going to put it at 50. We can consider these slow flying magpies. Maybe we could, when we are coding the combat, maybe when they detect a bogan nearby, their speed actually increases, things like that. So there's lots of things we can play with because we've got these variables, and we can think of, oh, how can we use that in our game? How can we vary things within our game to enhance the experience? Let's move along, grabbing our last direction, variable for our animation, variable for our direction change timer. We want our magpie to actually fly in one direction for a while, then decide to change, and so it keeps moving around the map without being in any fixed path. And we're going to give it a time interval of 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, it's going to turn directions. Keeping on going. What I've done here is magpies are territorial, right? That's why they're swooping, because they don't want you coming near their nest and their chicks. So we're going to give our magpies a territory, and we're going to do this with this var min position. So 2 more variables, min position and max position. So the 0, 0 represents our minimum X and our minimum Y. And you should recall, I hope, on our map, that corner where I started painting from is the 0, 0 point. Then as we go to our right, hang on if I'm going to do this correctly for the camera, right, we go increasing in digits for our X, and as we go down, we increase in digits for our Y. So you've got our minimum and maximum positions that our magpie can fly around in. So I've actually just set that to my entire map, which is 800 by 430 pixels. You can set that however you like, and what I will be doing over time is I'll add in more magpies and I'll give each of them their own territory that they can patrol. Moving along, we've got our function ready, and for those Arduino fans out there, and I've spent more time programming in Arduino IDE than I have done in Godot, you could probably think about that ready function in a similar way to what our setup function would be in our Arduino. It's going to run at the start there when our node is activated. And then, so we've got our animated sprite 2D. It's exactly the same as what we did in our player character. And then we've got this extra thing here though, where when that's activated, we're going to start running this pick random direction. And that pick random direction we'll explain a bit further down, but that's all to do with when that 5 seconds is up. So for our Arduino fans, the process function that we have here is similar to the void loop. So where we said the ready function is like our setup, the process one, the physics process one is like our loop. So it's running all the time. It runs every frame basically. So, and all we're doing here is we're going to be counting to see if we've reached the 5 seconds for the magpie's direction and then change it. We've got our velocity like we had for our player character as well. And here is where we're just flipping or resetting, I suppose, the flips on our animation. Here we get into our animation where we just work out which way we're going to be going. So it's similar again to our player, only a little bit different because we're only using the 2 sets of animations and we're doing an extra flip. Move and slide we know about. Here is where we make sure our magpie doesn't leave their territory. Further along, that's just checking positions. And here is the pick random direction, which we talked about as well. So this one here is to work out which direction our magpie is going to go in next. And that is our script. Just jumping back in quickly because I'd made an error in the script. So the pick random direction function, there was an error in that. So I'm holding this on the screen for you now so you can copy down the corrected code. The birds weren't turning around after 5 seconds because we weren't normalizing it, but that's all right. Here's the fixed up code. Copy that one down instead. So it's only the pick random direction that changed, none of the rest of the code. Okay, so that's the script done. Save your script. And then what I want you to do is go to the 2D canvas for our magpie. We're going to tweak this a little bit now. So in our magpie canvas or our magpie scene, make sure you've got the root node that I called magpie highlighted, and then head over to your inspector and go down to where you can see this collision menu. I'm going to open up collision there, and this has our layer and mask. Now what we're going to do with our magpie is we're actually going to put them on layer 2 and mask 2 only. So our magpie is on layer 2 and mask 2. That means they're basically, if you think about it like this, we could say 1 is the ground, 2 is the air. At the moment, everything we've done apart from this magpie is all just layer 1 and mask 1. The magpie we're doing is layer 2 and mask 2 only. So that's only in the air. Everything else is only on the ground. What I would like to do is go down a bit further and click on our ordering, because we want to get our Y sorting enabled for these magpies as well. So down to ordering, what I'm going to do there is click on Y sort enabled and Z index as 1. And that's all I want to do in there at the moment. Actually, no, it's not. I reckon I actually have done the magpie and the bogan. It's two different sizes. And if we do this as it is, my magpie is going to be enormous. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to make my magpie a bit smaller. So he's not completely overpowering the entire scene. Actually, just think it would be possibly more appropriate in terms of the mental picture that most of us Aussies have of magpies. They're more like giant pterodactyls. All right, so that's that done. I'm going to save my magpie and I'm going to go into my player scene. And what I want to do in my player scene, again, I want to be on the root node, which is called player. I want to again go to those collision properties in my inspector, and I want to add mask 2. So what we're saying now is our player is on layer 1, but he can also interact with layer 2 things as well, which would be our magpie. And our magpie is on layer 2 and only interacts with layer 2 things. So it's not going to interact with any of the trees or the rocks that we've set up, but it can interact with our player. And that's how we can make it like it's a bird and our player is on the ground. Okay, so let's save our player. Let's go to our world. And now, if you might remember how we got our player scene in there, we just need to drag it in. So we grab our magpie scene, and I'm just going to drag it in next to my bogan there. Let's zoom in a bit, have a look. Okay, not bad. I think we're probably ready to fire this up and see what happens. So my magpie will pick a random direction and just head off. It should be able to bump into me, and it shouldn't bump into any trees. Actually, I reckon because we're dealing with randoms, I might actually get a few duplicates of this just to make sure something goes towards us or near us, and we can try and make sure we can run into one of them. All right, I'm going to save my world and I'm going to click on play. Let's have a look at what we get. All right, did you see that? He bumped into me and I'm still bumping into trees. Let me get in his way. There we go. Excellent. So we can interact with the magpie. The magpie is not interacting with the rocks or the trees, but I still am. That's everything I wanted to get done today. I'm really happy with where we're up to. I'll throw up the must, may, might, because you probably might not have caught up with everything I did as we went there. So that'll give you a chance to then go back, review the scripts and all that sort of stuff. All right, hopefully your game is starting to look a lot more fun as we're getting these extra features in. So what's our must, may, might for this one? Well, you must get your enemy scene created and everything that goes along with that, the sprites and the script and all of that. You may like to experiment with adding additional instances of your enemy, like I did at the end there. And what you might like to do is, if you're thinking about, well, I've learned a bit, I want to sort of forge ahead now, how would you create another enemy that wasn't flying, right? So think about what I talked about with the layers and the masking. If you created a whole new enemy, wrote a new script as well, you could basically get away with changing almost nothing, except for you would just need to fix those layers. So think about how you would need to do that. Then you can just go and find yourself another sprite strip and see if you can race ahead of me and get a few different sorts of enemies all sorted out. And then you could go, oh, maybe I could make this one a faster one and this one a slower one and things like that. See how you go. So that's all for this lesson. We considered our enemy design in ARPGs and how enemies and players and worlds and all that need to go together. And we also created our first enemy in Godot. And our next lesson is going to be another big one as we add combat. So that involves amending both our player and our enemy. We're going to be messing with animations, with scripts, with the world scene, with the player scene, with the enemy scene. So there's going to be a lot going on. We might have to break it into two. We'll see how we go, but it's all about combat. And the quote I want to leave you with this week is, "It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but impossible to find it anywhere else." And that's from Arthur Schopenhauer. I'll see you next time.